Hey there, folks. Let me tell you a story about two men, a broken down truck, and 3 days that changed everything. This is a story about Marcus and the man who taught him that sometimes the best things in life happen when your plans fall apart. So wherever you're listening from right now, drop a comment and let me know what city you're tuning in from. I want to know if you're hearing this from a small town like the one in our story, or maybe you're in some big city somewhere. Go ahead, tell me where you are. Now, Marcus had been making this trip for 15 years. Every October, same routine. Load up the cattle truck, drive 3 hours into town, sell the herd at the auction, pocket the money, and drive straight back to the ranch before sunset. He didn't linger, didn't explore, didn't window shop. Marcus was a man of habit, and his habits had kept him alive and his ranch running through droughts, floods, and everything in between. The town itself was one of those places caught between two worlds. Main Street still had the old feed store and the diner where ranchers gathered at 5 in the morning. But now there were boutique coffee shops and a yoga studio that nobody over 50 would be caught dead in. The old movie theater had been converted into luxury condos. Progress, they called it. Marcus called it something else, but he kept those opinions to himself. Every year he'd drive down that main avenue, and every year he'd see that dealership, chrome and glass, all shiny and completely out of place among the brick buildings that had stood there since before his grandfather was born. Luxury European cars that cost more than most people in the county made in 5 years. It was called Donovan Import Motors, and Marcus had never once considered stopping there. What would a rancher need with a car that probably couldn't even make it up the dirt road to his property? But fate, or maybe just bad timing and a worn-out water pump, had other plans. It was a Tuesday morning, October 15th. The auction didn't start until noon, so Marcus was taking his time, driving slow through town, when he felt it, that telltale shudder. The temperature gauge climbing, the smell of burning coolant, and wouldn't you know it, his truck decided to die right there, right in front of those gleaming windows full of cars he'd never own. He coasted into the parking lot, more out of necessity than choice, and sat there for a moment in the cab of his truck, watching steam rise from under the hood. 23 years he'd had this truck, bought it used with money he'd saved from his first few cattle sales. It had never let him down before, not really. Sure, it needed work here and there, but it always got him where he needed to go. Marcus climbed out, popped the hood, and was staring at the engine when he heard footsteps behind him. Expensive footsteps, the kind that came from shoes that had never seen a day of honest work. Looks like you've got some trouble there. Marcus turned around and felt something in his chest do a strange little flip. The man standing there was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair touched with gray at the temples. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's entire wardrobe, and a watch that caught the morning sun and threw it back in sharp little bursts of light. But it was his eyes that got Marcus. Dark brown, almost black, and looking at him with what seemed like genuine concern. "Water pump, I think," Marcus said, wiping his hands on his jeans even though they weren't dirty yet. "I'll call a tow. Get out of your way." "No need for that. I'm James Donovan. I own the place. Why don't you pull it around back to the service bay? My mechanics can take a look." "This is a '99 Ford," Marcus said slowly. "Your mechanics work on Ferraris and Porsches." James smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested he wasn't used to people saying no to him. "An engine is an engine, come on, I insist." Now Marcus should have said no, should have called the tow truck like he planned, had it hauled to the Ford dealer on the other side of town, waited at the diner drinking bad coffee until it was fixed. That's what he should have done. But something about the way James looked at him, something about that smile made him nod and climb back into the truck. The service bay was exactly what you'd expect. Spotless floors, tools that looked like they'd never been used, and 3 mechanics who looked up with surprise when Marcus's dusty ranch truck rolled in next to a silver Bentley. "Carlos, take a look at this, will you?" James called out to the oldest of the 3 mechanics. "Water pump, we think." Carlos, a man in his 50s with grease under his fingernails and skepticism in his eyes, walked over and spent a few minutes checking things out. "Water pump for sure. Maybe the thermostat too. I can order the parts, but they won't be here until Thursday at the earliest. This old girl isn't exactly priority shipping." Thursday. That was 3 days from now. Marcus felt his carefully planned schedule crumbling. "What's the nearest hotel?" "You're not staying at a hotel," James said, and it wasn't a question. "I've got a guest house behind my property. You'll stay there." "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but—" "James, call me James, and it's not an offer, it's just practical. The guest house is empty. You need a place to stay. Done." He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "This is my address. Come by around 6. We'll get you settled." Marcus stood there holding that card, watching James walk away toward the showroom floor, and wondered what exactly he'd just agreed to. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Marcus went to the auction, sold his cattle for a decent price, and spent the afternoon wandering around town trying to remember the last time his routine had been disrupted like this. He couldn't. His life was routine, predictable, safe. At 6 o'clock sharp, he pulled up to the address on the card, driving the loaner truck that Carlos had insisted he take. If the dealership had been impressive, James's house was something else entirely. Modern architecture, all glass and clean lines, sitting on what had to be 5 acres just outside town. The guest house James had mentioned was actually nicer than Marcus's own home. James answered the door in jeans and a casual shirt, and somehow that was more unsettling than the suit had been. It made him look real, accessible, human. "Come on in," James said. "I'll show you the guest house, and then maybe you'll join me for dinner." I was just about to throw some steaks on the grill. Marcus followed him through the main house, trying not to gawk at the art on the walls, the furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, the view of the prairie stretching out beyond the windows. The guest house was connected by a covered walkway, and it was exactly as nice as Marcus had feared. King-sized bed, full bathroom, a little kitchenette. "This is too much," Marcus said. "It's empty space," James replied. "Might as well use it. Now about those steaks, you a rare man or medium?" "Rare," Marcus said automatically, then added, "But you don't have to. I'm grilling anyway, come on." So Marcus found himself on James Donovan's back patio, beer in hand, watching the sun set over the prairie while a man he'd met 6 hours ago grilled 2 perfect ribeyes. It was surreal. It was strange. It was, Marcus had to admit, kind of nice. "So," James said, flipping the steaks, "tell me about the ranch." And Marcus did. He started talking and couldn't seem to stop. He told James about the land his grandfather had homesteaded, about building it up from nothing, about the hard years and the good years, about the solitude he'd grown to love. James listened, asked questions, actually seemed interested. "You ever get lonely out there?" James asked. Marcus took a long drink of his beer. "Sometimes, but lonely and alone aren't the same thing." "No," James said quietly. "They're not." They ate dinner as the stars came out, and Marcus learned that James had grown up in this very town, left for business school in Chicago, made a fortune in tech before his 40th birthday, and came back home 5 years ago to open the dealership because he missed the wide-open spaces. "City life wasn't for me," James said. "Too much noise, too many people. Out here you can actually think, but you sell cars to people with city money," Marcus pointed out. James laughed. "Fair point. I guess I'm caught between 2 worlds. Not quite country anymore, but not city either. Somewhere in the middle. That sounds uncomfortable." "It is," James admitted. "But most worthwhile things are." Let me know in the comments how you're enjoying the story so far. Give it a rating from 0 to 10. I want to know if you're feeling this, if you're invested in where Marcus and James are heading. Drop that number down there. Marcus went back to the guest house around 10, his head buzzing from beer and conversation and something else he couldn't quite name. He lay in that comfortable bed, staring at the ceiling, and thought about James Donovan, thought about the way he smiled, the way he listened, the way he seemed genuinely interested in a rancher's life. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at Marcus like that. Hell, it had been a long time since Marcus had let anyone look at him like that. The next morning, Marcus woke up to the smell of coffee and followed his nose to find James in the main house kitchen, making breakfast like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Morning," James said, not looking up from the eggs he was scrambling. "Coffee's fresh, hope you're hungry." They ate breakfast together, and then James surprised him by saying, "I've got to show a car this morning, but I'm free this afternoon. Thought maybe you'd like to see something." "See what?" "You'll see." The car showing took an hour, and Marcus watched from the service bay as James transformed into a salesman. Smooth, confident, closing the deal on a BMW like it was easy. When the customer drove away happy, James came back and said, "Ready?" They drove for 20 minutes in James's personal car, a black Range Rover that still smelled new, until they reached a property that made Marcus stop and stare. Rolling hills, a creek running through it, good grazing land stretching as far as he could see. "I own this," James said. "Bought it 2 years ago. Keep thinking I'll do something with it, but I never have time." "It's beautiful," Marcus said, and meant it. They walked the property for hours, and Marcus found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did. James asked him questions about the land, about ranching, about what someone would need to start a small operation. Marcus answered, and somewhere in all that talking, their hands brushed together, and neither of them pulled away. When they got back to the house, the sun was setting again, and James said, "I like you, Marcus." "I like you too," Marcus replied, because what else could he say? It was the truth. "I haven't felt this way about someone in a long time," James continued. Hell, maybe ever. And I know you're leaving tomorrow or the day after, and you've got your life and I've got mine. But I want you to know that these past 2 days have been the best I've had in years." Marcus stood there in the fading light, looking at this man who wore $1,000 suits and sold cars worth more than houses. And he saw something he recognized. Loneliness. The same loneliness he saw in his own mirror every morning. "Can I kiss you?" Marcus asked, and his voice was rough with wanting. "God, yes," James said. The kiss was everything Marcus had been denying he wanted. Hungry and sweet and desperate all at once. James tasted like coffee and something expensive, and his hands came up to cup Marcus's face like he was something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James said, "Stay tonight, in the main house, with me." Marcus didn't even hesitate. "Yes." They went inside, and what happened next was tender and fierce and everything in between. James undressed Marcus like he was unwrapping a gift, taking his time, touching every scar, every muscle earned through hard work. Marcus returned the favor, discovering that underneath those expensive clothes, James was all lean muscle and smooth skin. They made love slowly at first, learning each other, finding rhythm and harmony. James whispered things against Marcus's skin, words about beauty and strength and wanting, and Marcus, who had never been good with words, showed his feelings through touch instead. Later, lying tangled together in James's bed, Marcus said, "I don't know how this works. You're here. I'm 3 hours away. We live completely different lives. We'll figure it out," James said. "People who want to be together find a way." "You make it sound simple." "Maybe it is," James replied. "Maybe we've both been making it complicated because we're scared." "I am scared," Marcus admitted. "Haven't felt this way about anyone since I was 23. Thought I was past all that." "You're not past anything," James said, kissing his shoulder. "Neither of us is. We're just getting started." Thursday came too quickly. Carlos called in the morning to say the truck was ready, running better than ever. Marcus should have felt relief, but instead he felt something like panic. James had already left for work, leaving a note that said, "Come by the dealership before you go." Marcus drove the loaner truck back one last time and found James in his office, door open, working on paperwork. When he looked up and saw Marcus, his whole face changed, softened. "All fixed?" James asked. "Good as new," Carlos says. "Good. That's good." But James didn't look like he thought it was good. He looked like Marcus felt. They stood there in that awkward space between wanting and reality until Marcus said, "I could come back. In 2 weeks maybe. Don't have a reason, but I could find one." "You don't need a reason," James said. "Just come back." "Okay," Marcus agreed. "Okay, I will." James walked him out to his truck and they stood there in the parking lot of the dealership, both of them aware of the mechanics watching from the service bay, the customers browsing the showroom. "Call me when you get home," James said. "Let me know you made it safe." "I will." "And Marcus?" James stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could smell his cologne, that expensive scent he was already getting used to. "These 3 days meant something to me. I need you to know that." "They meant something to me too," Marcus said quietly. He drove away with James standing in that parking lot, getting smaller in his rearview mirror, and Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or possibility, or just the simple knowledge that somewhere in this world, there was someone who saw him and wanted him anyway. The ranch was exactly as he'd left it, but somehow it felt different, emptier. Marcus went through his evening routine, fed the horses, checked the fences, made dinner for one. When he called James like he'd promised, they talked for 2 hours about nothing and everything, and when they finally hung up, Marcus lay in his own bed and smiled at the ceiling. 2 weeks later, Marcus drove back to town. He told himself it was for supplies, for business, for any number of practical reasons, but when he pulled up to James's house instead of the feed store, they both knew the truth. This time, Marcus stayed for 3 days. They fell into an easy rhythm, James working during the day while Marcus explored the town, reconnecting with a place he'd driven through but never really seen. In the evenings, they cooked together, talked, made love with increasing confidence and decreasing desperation. It was starting to feel less like a fling and more like something real. "What if you came out to the ranch?" Marcus asked on the last night. "Stayed for a weekend?" "I'd like that," James said. "But Marcus, we need to talk about what this is, what we're doing." "I know. I'm not interested in casual," James said. "I'm past the age where I want to date around. If we're doing this, I want to do it right." "What's right look like?" Marcus asked. "I don't know yet, but I want to find out with you." So they did. James came to the ranch the next weekend, and Marcus watched him fall in love with the land the way Marcus had fallen for him. They worked together, James learning how to mend a fence, how to check cattle, how to read the weather in the sky. In the evenings, they sat on Marcus's porch and watched the sun go down, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I could get used to this," James said one night, beer in hand, boots dusty from a day's work. "Yeah?" Marcus replied. "Yeah, it's peaceful out here. Quiet in a good way, not a lonely way." "That's because you're here," Marcus said, and James turned to look at him, something soft and vulnerable in his expression. "I'm falling in love with you," James said. "Just so you know." "I know," Marcus replied, "because I'm falling too. Now I want to know if you're still with me. Drop a comment and tell me what you think so far. Rate this story from 0 to 10. Are you invested? Do you want to know what happens next? Let me know." The months that followed were a dance of distance and desire. They saw each other every chance they could, trading weekends between the ranch and the town. James started spending more time away from the dealership, trusting his manager to handle things. Marcus found himself making more trips to town than cattle sales strictly required. People started to notice. In a town that size, they always do. The gossip started small, just whispers about the rancher and the dealership owner spending time together. But whispers have a way of growing into conversations, and conversations into confrontations. It was Marcus's neighbor, Bill Henderson, who brought it up first. Stopped by the ranch one day with a six-pack and a question. "People are talking," Bill said, not looking at Marcus directly. "About you and that Donovan fellow." "Let them talk," Marcus replied. "It's not that simple, Marcus. This is a small community, conservative community. There are people who won't take kindly to that kind of thing." "That kind of thing," Marcus repeated slowly. "You mean two adults caring about each other?" "You know what I mean." "I do," Marcus said, "and I'm asking if you have a problem with it." Bill was quiet for a long moment, turning the beer bottle in his hands. "No," he finally said. "No, I don't. Known you 20 years, Marcus. You're a good man. If you're happy, I'm happy for you. Just wanted to warn you that not everyone's going to see it that way." "I appreciate the warning," Marcus said, and meant it. But Bill was right. Not everyone saw it that way. Marcus lost a contract with a cattle buyer who said he didn't want to do business with that kind of person. Got cold shoulders at the feed store. Had someone leave a note on his truck that said things he threw away without reading the whole thing. James faced his own challenges. A few customers stopped coming to the dealership. Someone threw a rock through his showroom window with a note attached. The town that had welcomed him back with open arms suddenly had some people who wanted him to leave. They could have given up, could have decided it wasn't worth it, gone back to their safe, lonely lives. But here's the thing about finding something real in a world full of pretense. Once you have it, you can't let it go just because it's hard. "We could move," James said one night. "Go somewhere bigger, more accepting. I could sell the dealership, you could sell the ranch. Start over somewhere new. Is that what you want?" Marcus asked. "I want you," James said simply. "Everything else is negotiable." Marcus thought about that. Thought about leaving the land his grandfather had homesteaded, the life he'd built. But he also thought about waking up alone every morning, about going back to the way things were before that water pump failed. "No," he said finally. "No, I'm not running. This is my home. Our home, if you want it to be. People can accept it or not, but I'm done hiding who I am." "You're sure?" "Never been more sure of anything." So they stayed. They stopped hiding. When they went to town together, they walked side by side, and if people stared, let them stare. When they went to the diner for breakfast, they sat on the same side of the booth, and if the waitress gave them dirty looks, they left her a good tip anyway. Slowly, gradually, things started to shift. Not with everyone. Some people would never accept them, and that was something they had to learn to live with. But others came around. The owner of the feed store, a woman in her 60s who'd known Marcus since he was a kid, pulled him aside one day and said, "My nephew is gay, lives in California because he didn't think he could stay here. Maybe if he sees you two making it work, he'll come home. So thank you." The mechanic, Carlos, told James that his daughter had come out to him a few months back, and seeing James and Marcus gave him hope that she could have a good life, a normal life, even in a small town. These small moments of acceptance meant more than Marcus could say. They weren't world-changing, but they were world-shifting, at least for the people involved. A year after that water pump failed, James sold his house in town and moved into the ranch. They built an addition onto Marcus's old house, blending James's modern aesthetic with the rustic charm of the original structure. It shouldn't have worked, but somehow it did. Like them. James kept the dealership but hired a full-time manager, letting himself step back and spend more time on the ranch. He discovered he liked ranching, liked the physical work, the rhythm of the seasons, the connection to the land. Marcus discovered he liked having a partner, someone to share the work and the worry and the wins. They weren't perfect. They fought about stupid things like where to put the furniture and serious things like money and how much time James still spent at work. But they always talked it through, always came back to each other, always remembered that they'd chosen this, chosen each other, and that was worth fighting for. 2 years in, they had a party at the ranch. Bill Henderson came and Carlos from the dealership and the feed store owner and a dozen other people from town who'd decided that love was love, no matter what form it took. They grilled steaks and drank beer and watched the sun set over the prairie, and Marcus looked around at this life they'd built and felt something like peace. Happy? James asked, coming up beside him with 2 fresh beers. Yeah, Marcus said. Yeah, I really am. Me too, James said and kissed him right there in front of everyone because they could, because this was their home, their life, their love. Now, not everything was easy. There were still people who wouldn't do business with them, still occasional hate mail, still moments when they questioned whether it was worth it. But those moments got fewer and farther between, and the good moments, the moments of quiet happiness and shared purpose, those kept accumulating. James surprised Marcus one evening, 3 years into their relationship, by taking him back to that property he'd shown him on their second day together. The rolling hills, the creek, the good grazing land. I've been thinking, James said. This land is just sitting here, not doing anything. What if we expanded the ranch, brought in more cattle, maybe hired some help so we're not doing all the work ourselves? That's a big step, Marcus said carefully. I know, but I'm ready for big steps, are you? Marcus looked out over the land, imagining it dotted with cattle, imagining building something bigger than what he'd had, building it together with James. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I think I am. They bought the property, took out a loan to expand the herd, hired 2 ranch hands who didn't care who they loved as long as the paycheck cleared. The work was hard, harder than before, but they did it together. James learned to ride well enough to check fences, to spot a sick calf, to read the land the way Marcus did. Marcus learned to handle the business side, the spreadsheets and projections that came naturally to James. They became partners in every sense of the word. Not just romantic partners, but business partners, life partners, people who'd chosen to build something together from the ground up. 4 years after that water pump failed, they were at the diner having breakfast when a young couple came in. 2 men, maybe mid-20s, looking nervous and unsure. They sat in a corner booth not touching, eyes darting around like they expected someone to say something. James caught Marcus's eye and tilted his head toward them. Without a word, they got up and walked over to the young couple's table. Mind if we join you for a minute? Marcus asked. The younger men looked startled, but nodded. Marcus and James sat down, and James said, We couldn't help but notice you 2. We're together too, have been for 4 years. Really? One of the young men said, and his voice cracked a little. Here? In this town? Right here, Marcus confirmed. It hasn't always been easy, but it's been worth it. They talked for an hour, sharing their story, answering questions, just being visible proof that it was possible. When they finally got up to leave, the young man who'd spoken said, Thank you. You don't know what this means. But Marcus did know. He remembered what it felt like to think he'd always be alone, always be different, always be outside looking in. If he and James could make even one person feel less alone, that was worth everything. 5 years in, they were sitting on the porch watching a storm roll in across the prairie. The air smelled like rain and dust, that particular scent that only comes from the heartland. James had his feet propped up on the railing, a beer in one hand, Marcus's hand in the other. You ever regret it? James asked suddenly. Choosing this life? Choosing me? Not once, Marcus said, and it was the absolute truth. You? Not even close, James replied. Best decision I ever made was offering to fix your truck that day. The truck fixed itself, Marcus pointed out. Water pump would have blown either way. Maybe, James agreed. Or maybe it knew what I didn't, that I needed you to break down right there, right then. Or I'd have spent the rest of my life selling cars to people I didn't care about and going home alone every night. That's real poetic, Marcus said, trying to hide his smile. I have my moments, James replied, pulling Marcus closer. Besides, you make me poetic. You make me a lot of things I never thought I'd be. The storm hit, rain pounding on the roof, lightning splitting the sky. They stayed on the covered porch, watching nature put on a show, and Marcus thought about how far they'd come, from strangers to lovers, to partners, to something that didn't have a single word but encompassed everything good in his life. 6 years in, James proposed. Not with a fancy ring or a big production, but on a random Tuesday while they were fixing a fence line. He just stopped, looked at Marcus and said, Marry me? What? Marcus said. Sure, he'd heard wrong. Marry me, James repeated. I know it's legal now, and I know we don't need a piece of paper to validate what we have, but I want it anyway. I want to stand up in front of whoever will show up and say that you're mine, and I'm yours, and that's how it's going to be for the rest of our lives." Marcus stood there with fence wire in his hands and his heart in his throat and said the only thing he could say. Yes, they got married at the ranch on a Saturday in October, 7 years after that water pump failed. It was a small wedding, just the people who mattered. Bill Henderson stood up as Marcus's best man. Carlos from the dealership stood up for James. The woman from the feed store cried through the whole ceremony. When they said their vows, Marcus kept it simple. I choose you. I chose you 7 years ago when I said yes to coffee, and I've chosen you every day since, and I'll keep choosing you for as long as I'm breathing. James, being James, was more eloquent. You taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person. You taught me that strength comes in quiet moments and gentle touches. You taught me that love doesn't have to be loud to be real. I love you, Marcus. I loved you before I knew what love was, and I'll love you long after we're both dust on this prairie wind. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. They danced at their wedding, despite Marcus swearing he didn't dance, swaying to an old country song under the stars. Their guests, the strange collection of ranchers and car salesmen and townspeople who'd decided that love was more important than prejudice, cheered and clapped and celebrated two men who'd decided to build a life together despite everything. 8 years in, they were solid. The ranch was profitable. The dealership was thriving. They'd built something real and lasting, something that would outlive them. They'd proved, at least to themselves and the people who mattered, that love was love, and it could flourish anywhere if you gave it enough room and enough time. Before I finish this story, let me ask you one more time. How are you feeling about all this? Rate it from 0 to 10 in the comments. Tell me what you think. Tell me if stories like this matter to you. 9 years after that water pump failed, Marcus and James were sitting on their porch again as they did most evenings, watching the sun set over land they'd built together, a life they'd fought for, a love they'd chosen every single day. You ever wonder what would have happened if your truck hadn't broken down that day? James asked. Sometimes, Marcus admitted. I think I'd still be making that trip every October, still spending every night alone, still thinking that was all there was for someone like me. Someone like you, James repeated. You mean someone incredible? Someone strong and stubborn and beautiful? I was going to say someone gay in a small town, Marcus said with a laugh. That too, James agreed, but mostly the other things. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned orange and pink and purple, the colors bleeding into each other the way their lives had bled together, distinct but inseparable. I'm glad your truck broke down, James said finally. Me too, Marcus replied. Best mechanical failure of my life. And really, that's the story. 2 men, a broken truck, 3 days that turned into a lifetime. It's not a fairy tale. There's no magic here, no destiny that couldn't be denied. Just 2 people who saw each other, really saw each other, and decided that what they found was worth keeping. Some people in town still won't do business with them. Some people still whisper when they walk by. But there are more who smile now, who wave, who've realized that Marcus and James aren't a threat to their way of life, just 2 people trying to live theirs. The ranch continues to thrive. They've expanded 3 times now, bought up neighboring properties as they became available, built something that will last long after they're gone. They've hired more people, created jobs, contributed to the community in tangible ways that are hard to argue with even if you don't approve of who they love. James still runs the dealership, though he spends less time there and more time on the land he's come to love as much as Marcus does. He's traded his Italian suits for jeans and work boots more often than not, though he still cleans up nice when he needs to. Marcus still makes that trip to town every October to sell cattle, but now James comes with him, and they stop at the dealership to check on things, and they have dinner at the diner where they had their first meal together, and they drive home together to a life neither of them imagined but both of them built. 10 years after that water pump failed, they're sitting on the porch again when a young ranch hand they hired a few months back approaches nervously. Sir, he says to Marcus, can I ask you something? Sure, Jake. What's on your mind? Jake shuffles his feet, not meeting their eyes. There's someone I want to bring around, to meet you both, but I wanted to make sure it was okay first. Of course it's okay, James says. This is your home too. It's a guy, Jake blurts out. The person I want you to meet. It's my boyfriend, and I know some people have a problem with that, but I figured if anyone would understand, it'd be you two. Marcus and James exchange a look, a whole conversation passing between them in a glance. Then Marcus says, bring him by for dinner on Sunday. We'd love to meet him. Jake's face breaks into a smile so wide, it looks like it might crack his face in half. Really, you mean it? We mean it, James confirms. And Jake? You don't have to be nervous about this stuff, not here, not with us. After Jake leaves, practically bouncing with joy, James turns to Marcus and says, "We did that." Did what? Made a place where someone like him feels safe. Made a place where love is just love. No qualifiers needed. "We did, didn't we?" Marcus says, and he sounds surprised, like he hadn't fully realized it until now. That Sunday, Jake shows up with his boyfriend, a nervous young man from 3 towns over who relaxes the moment he realizes nobody's judging him. They have dinner together, the 4 of them, and Jake's boyfriend tells them about growing up hiding who he was, about thinking he'd have to move to a city to find acceptance. "You don't have to hide here," James tells him. "Not anymore, things are changing. Slowly maybe, but they're changing." After they leave, Marcus and James clean up the dinner dishes together, moving around each other with the ease of long practice. They've done this 1,000 times. We'll do it 1,000 more, and every time it feels like a small miracle. This life they have, this simple, extraordinary life. "You know what's funny?" Marcus says as he dries the last plate. "I spent so many years thinking I was broken somehow, like there was something wrong with me because I didn't want what everyone else wanted, because I looked at men instead of women, because I chose solitude over pretending to be something I wasn't. And now?" James prompts. "Now I know I wasn't broken. I was just waiting for my truck to break down in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, waiting for someone who saw me and didn't want me to be anything other than what I am." James pulls him close, kisses him in their kitchen, in their home, in their life. "Best water pump failure in history," he murmurs against Marcus's lips. "Best water pump failure in history," Marcus agrees. "And that's where I'll leave them, on their ranch, in their home, living their life. They're not perfect. Their love story isn't without struggle, but it's real, and it's theirs, and it's proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when everything falls apart. Because Marcus's truck breaking down that day, that was the beginning of everything, the beginning of love, of partnership, of a life neither of them knew they could have. It was the beginning of proving that small towns can change, that people can surprise you, that love really can conquer all if you're brave enough to fight for it. They're still fighting for it 10 years later, still choosing each other every single day, still building a life that makes space for others to build theirs too. And maybe that's the real love story here, not just 2 men finding each other, but 2 men creating a place where others can find themselves. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Love doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for the perfect time or the perfect place or the perfect circumstances. It shows up when you least expect it, in the form of a broken water pump and a stranger with kind eyes, and it asks you to be brave enough to take a chance. Marcus took that chance. James took that chance. And because they did, they built something beautiful, something lasting, something that will ripple out into the world long after their story ends. Now, one final time I want to hear from you. Rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Tell me what you thought. Tell me if it moved you, if it made you think, if it gave you hope that love can exist anywhere if you're willing to fight for it. And tell me where you're listening from. I want to know where these words are finding you, what town or city or ranch or apartment you're in right now. Because stories like this matter. They matter because they show us that we're not alone, that someone else has walked this path and made it through, that love is possible even when it seems impossible, that home can be found in the most unexpected places. Marcus and James found their home in each other. They found it on a ranch in the middle of the Midwest in a town that wasn't always ready for them, but learned to make space. They found it in quiet moments and hard work, and the simple decision to keep choosing each other, every single day, no matter what. And if they can do it, if they can build something real and lasting in the face of prejudice and doubt and all the obstacles that stood in their way, then maybe there's hope for all of us. Hope that we can find our person, our place, our purpose. Hope that love really is enough if we're brave enough to let it be. So thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for spending this time with Marcus and James, for following their journey from that first broken truck to a life built on love and hard work and stubborn determination. Thank you for being open to a love story that might not look like the ones you're used to, but is no less beautiful for being different. And remember, wherever you are, whoever you love, whatever obstacles you're facing, you deserve happiness. You deserve love. You deserve a life that feels like home. Don't give up on that. Don't let anyone tell you it's not possible. Because somewhere out there, your water pump is going to fail at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place, and your whole life is going to change. That's the thing about love. It finds a way. It always finds a way. Drop those comments, folks. Let me know what you thought. Rate it 0 to 10. Tell me where you're listening from. And keep believing in love, in all its forms. in all its possibilities. Until next time.
Enjoyed this story? Good. Because I have so much more to tell you, but those other ones I can't put out here. It's not for everyone. It's for those who really want to go deep. On my Patreon, the stories are more intense, more free, more real. No censorship, no filter, no limitations. It's the place where I can truly explore everything these characters live, feel, and desire. Things that don't make it out here. And trust me, there's a lot waiting for you. And it's not just content, it's a community. A closed space for those who want real representation, who want to support the LGBTQ+ cause and have access to benefits nobody else has. Early content, behind the scenes, stories only members get to know, and a group of people who think just like you. A place where we can talk about everything, without judgment, without limits. There are already a lot of people inside following stories you don't even know exist yet. And every month, there's something new coming. Getting in is easy. Point your phone camera at the QR code on screen right now, or use the link in the first pinned comment down below or in the video description. In less than 2 minutes, you're already part of it. See you on the other side.